The first item that President Trump has signed.
Just on the first day of this new Trump presidency, we had sort of an in real time demonstration of how unpredictable things will be. About a month and a half before Inauguration Day, President Trump had threatened on social media to slap 25% tariffs on goods coming into the US from Canada, which was ostensibly to sort of force us to shape up our act when it came to the border. He talked about his perception that fentanyl and migrants were flooding across the border from Canada to the US. Factually, that's a pretty iffy proposition. It's something in the order of 1% of both of those things coming into the US coming from Canada. Many more, a much, much bigger percentage, come across the southern border from Mexico. The consensus among economists is that tariffs make products more expensive for ordinary people. That's not a cost that the exporting country pays. It's technically a cost that the importing company pays, but they would pass it on to their consumers. And in the morning, before the inauguration actually happened, some news reports came out saying that the tariffs were not happening, at least not imminently. And then later in the evening on Inauguration Day, he had live television cameras trained on him in the Oval Office as he signed live executive orders, this massive raft of them. His administration kind of made a big show out of this big stack of binders and folders in front of him. And a reporter asked about the tariffs, and he seemed to sort of freelance right there live.
We're thinking in terms of 25% on Mexico and Canada. I think we'll do it February 1st.
So we're sort of back to square one in terms of contemplating what this could mean for the Canadian economy. One of the sticking points is that Canada runs a trade surplus with the US, which means we sell and export more goods to them than they do to us. And Mr. Trump views this as sort of a subsidy or an unfair deal where he thinks Canada is taking advantage of the US. That is not the way economists would explain it. And that trade surplus is largely due to oil and gas and energy exports from Canada to the US, which points to sort of some of the political leverage here, some of the maneuvering. We have seen the federal government and the premiers here in Canada sort of desperately sounds pejorative, but with a great deal of energy and anxiety, I would say, convening meetings and talking about how to respond to this. And understandably enough, they view oil and gas and energy. Canada supplies a huge proportion of the US's voracious appetite for those things. Those would be our biggest carrot or stick, I guess, depending on how you view it, in terms of retaliatory tariffs. And the federal government has been very clear. They keep using the phrase to the point that it makes you a bit nauseous. Everything is on the table. This has become a big point of domestic tension within Canada because the Premier of Alberta, Danielle Smith, in talking about defending her province's interests, a vast majority of their economy relies on oil and gas exports to the US. So her argument is that if Canada were to, say, slap export tariffs on those goods to the US or some kind of quota, if they were to use that as sort of the punishment point for the Trump administration to try to get these tariffs stripped off Canadian goods eventually, her argument is that her province would bear an unfair burden of that, and that it would harm their economy. The flip side of that is that this might be the best card Canada has to play, the strongest counter argument to make. Donald Trump is a person who likes to think of himself as a wheeler and dealer, and it has looked from the beginning like these tariff threats were sort of his opening gambit in a series of negotiations, that he wants other countries, other parties to be sort of on their back foot and to feel like they're in a supplicant position. We're in a moment where Prime Minister Trudeau has said he will step down as Liberal leader and Prime Minister as soon as a successor is chosen, and the people who are vying for that job are trying to position themselves as the best place to respond to the Trump threat. So at this point, basically for Canadian politicians, for companies, and for citizens at large, it's just all about uncertainty and sort of watching and waiting to see what direction the storm will come from, how bad it will be, and trying to prepare without overreacting. So we're sort of in a very high stakes wait and see game at this point.